When I married Hannah, who liked to be called Han, I never thought I'd end up in such a nightmare. I'm Jim Robertson, as you might recall, and my wife's name is Hannah. When we tied the knot, I was convinced we'd grow old together, surrounded by grandkids. 2 years into our marriage, I started my own consulting engineering business, while Han worked at a small medical supplies company. We agreed to settle down and save money before starting a family. For 8 years, life was good, and our intimacy was great. I believed I had married the perfect woman. We bought a cozy cottage on a quiet street. It needed a lot of interior work, but structurally, it was sound. Our nearest neighbor was 200 yards away, with only 6 other houses on the street. It took us almost a year to renovate the place, doing most of the work ourselves, except for some plumbing and electrical tasks we hired out. We often talked about how wonderful it would be when we finally had kids. Things started to fall apart just before our 9th anniversary. Han became sharp with me. Our intimacy dwindled, and her attitude began to grate on my nerves. She started going out several evenings a week with girls from work, or so she said. Wherever they went must have been fun because she never came home before midnight. I began to suspect the worst, but convinced myself she wouldn't cheat on me. Little did I know how wrong I was. I confided in my childhood friend, Mike Watson. We had been buddies since first grade. When my business expanded and I needed an executive director, I turned to Mike because I trusted him. Mike knew Han and couldn't believe my suspicions at first, but after hearing the details, he changed his mind. Jim, all the signs are there. If you want my honest opinion, I think Han is cheating on you. Sorry, but I'd bet my career on it. When Mike said that, I knew he wasn't kidding. I thanked him and went back to my office, pondering my next move. If Han was cheating, our marriage was over. The worst part was that she would get half of everything I had. I looked up a private detective and found one who could meet me that day. When I explained my concerns to Sam Brooks, the private investigator, he assured me that if Han was cheating, he would get the proof I needed. I left his office feeling a bit better, though deep down, I hoped I was wasting money on his services. The next day, I met a technician at the cottage to install some hidden cameras and a voice recorder on the phone line. I didn't think it would reveal anything, as Han wasn't dumb enough to use the home phone if she was cheating. A week later, I contacted Sam, and the news was devastating. It's all in the report, and the DVD is very explicit. If I were you, I wouldn't watch it. Knowing is one thing, but seeing it is another. Thanking Sam for the advice, I paid his final fee and left with the report and DVD. Back at my office, I ignored Sam's advice and watched the DVD. The report showed that her supposed outings with the girls were cover-ups for trysts with some guy she worked with. They had several long lunches and took half-days off to go to a motel a few miles away. The report also mentioned they had been to his house a few times. The DVD, recorded on a Thursday, showed Han coming home in the afternoon with a man, heading straight to the bedroom and going at it for hours. Han did everything for him. What shocked and disgusted me was hearing Han tell her lover, "I need to meet you and the guys again. What we have is great, but all these big toys are heaven." I had never met the man she was with, but there wasn't much difference between him and me. We were both about the same age and build. With the evidence in hand, I planned to catch them at the cottage, beat him up, and throw Han out. The following Thursday, I left work early and drove past our house. As expected, Han's car and another one I didn't recognize were parked in the driveway. I parked down the street and headed to my house. As soon as I entered, I heard them upstairs, going at it wildly. I burst into the bedroom and yelled at the jerk to get out of my house. It turned out to be a bad move because it was a different jerk. The man was well over 6 feet tall and probably weighed 100 pounds more than me. He came at me, and everything went black. When I regained consciousness, I was tied to a chair with a gag in my mouth. Han was on the bed with 3 men, screaming. Eventually, one of them noticed I was awake. "Hey, look! The weakling is awake!" They all laughed. Han untangled herself from the mass of bodies on the bed and came over to me. The woman I married stood there, smiling, her face flushed. She removed the gag from my mouth. "Why, Han? Why are you doing this to us? I realize that being married to you is boring. I want to have fun, and all you care about is having kids and a wife at home who takes care of you." "Well, that's not happening. You thought you could barge in and ruin my fun, huh?" Han looked at me with a twisted smile. "As you can see, I have 3 real men satisfying me, so I don't need you anymore. Now that we're done, my friends are going to take you somewhere. Hope you enjoy it. I didn't recognize the woman standing in front of me. This couldn't be my wife, could it? One of the guys came over and punched me hard in the face, and the world went black again. When I came to, it was dark, and it took me a few seconds to orient myself. I was lying on my side, my wrists and ankles bound, and a hood over my head. From the movement, I realized I was in a vehicle, and judging by the cold metal floor, I guessed it was some kind of van. Looks like he's waking up again. Good, it'll save us from dragging him. We're almost there. I was tossed around as the vehicle drove over rough roads or dirt tracks. My head ached from the previous blow, and I was glad when the vehicle finally stopped. At least untie his legs. He can walk the last few steps. The last few steps? It dawned on me they were going to kill me, or so I thought. I was led over uneven ground, nearly falling several times. Get up! I'm not carrying you. Now move, you underscore. A voice commanded as a hand hit me on the head. I silently prayed that whatever they were going to do would be quick, and if it was my fate, let it end quickly. I stood, waiting to hear the click of a cocked gun. The hood on my head prevented me from seeing anything. Suddenly they began kicking and punching me, and I fell to the ground. The blows continued as my battered body lay still. I knew I was still alive, barely alive, but alive. I felt someone's fingers touch my neck, fingers moving carefully. No pulse. Should we bury him or leave him here? Who cares? Leave him. There's no one around for miles, and if his body is ever found, there won't be much left of him. If the one checking me knew what they were doing, they would have found my pulse. But where their fingers touched my neck, they had no chance. I heard my attackers laughing as they walked away. I lay still, thinking it was several hours, but it was probably only 10 minutes or so. I didn't move until I heard the distant sound of their vehicle driving away. Lying there, I wondered what made Han hate me so much. What turned her into someone who loves those big toys? I had always treated her right. I remembered her comment about my small size. Pain shot through my body as I tried to stand. It took several attempts as my wrists were tied. Finally, I managed to get up, my body aching as if hit by a truck. I knew the first thing I needed to do was try to remove the hood from my head. Wandering in complete darkness was not an option. Moving slowly, I stumbled into a bush or something and rubbed my head against it, trying to snag the hood. Eventually, it caught, and I was able to free myself from it. My eyes adjusted to the different darkness. Honestly, my left eye was swollen, and I hoped the damage wasn't permanent. As my eyes adjusted, I realized I had no idea where I was. All I knew was that I had been left in a forest or thick brush. Slowly, I moved in the direction that seemed easiest to navigate. I wasn't in a condition to climb after any falls. I wasn't a former military or anyone special, just a regular guy who didn't want to die. It took everything I had left to keep moving in one direction. After some time, still in pain, I noticed a light in the distance. Approaching closer to the light source, I realized it was a cottage or farm. I found enough energy to reach the gate. Attempting to open it was beyond my strength, so I screamed, and suddenly everything went dark again. When I managed to open my eyes, my left eye still swollen, I saw that I was in a room. I tried to sit up, but the pain was too much and I fell back. Please, don't move. It looks like you've had an accident or something. I looked up and saw a woman standing over me. Who are you? How did I get here? I found you outside my house last night. I heard your scream, and when I looked around, you were lying unconscious on the ground, she said. I remembered trying to open the gate. Now lie still and tell me what happened, if you can remember. Oh, I remembered everything very clearly. I just wasn't sure if I should discuss it with this stranger. My name is Eleanor, but you can call me Ellie. That's what I prefer. So how did you end up in this state? It's a long story, and I'm not sure you should hear it. My ribs hurt every time I tried to speak or breathe deeply. Should we call the police? No, please, no police. I promise I won't harm you, and I'll tell you what happened, but not right now. Ellie smiled, and I must have passed out again because I remembered nothing after that. When I woke up next, Ellie was in the room, and this time I managed to sit up. She adjusted some pillows so I could sit comfortably. I noticed my body was wrapped in bandages, and I had several cuts on my arms and legs. Do you have a mirror? Ellie nodded and handed me a small mirror. I almost dropped it when I saw my reflection. My lips were cut and swollen. My left eye was black and swollen. My right eye was heavily bruised, and there were several cuts on my face. Now, are you ready to tell me who you are and what happened? I nodded and told Ellie everything I could remember, from catching Han in bed with 3 men to my attempt to open her gate. Jim, you really should call the police, you know. No, please don't. I'll handle this my way and in my time. The last thing I need is the police involved. Do what you think is right, and do what you must. Now, I don't know where you live or anything, so you better stay here until you're well enough to leave. I thanked Ellie for her kindness. I had no idea who this woman was. I guess she was about 45 years old, about 10 years older than me. Ellie allowed me to use her phone to call Mike and let him know I was okay. Jim, where the hell have you been? Everyone is going crazy trying to find you. Han was here, worried sick about your disappearance. Mike, do me a favor, please. If Han asks, you haven't heard from me. I promise I'll explain everything when we next meet. If anything comes up at work, I trust you to handle it. I ended the call and Mike seemed satisfied. Ellie asked me what my plans were. I'm going to rest until I can move and get home. After that, I'm going to make some people pay for everything. I don't know how yet, but they will pay. Ellie just nodded and smiled. Do what you must, Jim, but be careful. Suddenly it dawned on me that aside from her name, I knew nothing about Ellie, and when I thought about it, I had no idea where I was. When Ellie told me the name of the nearest village, I estimated that I must be at least 3 hours from home. Ellie fed and cared for me, and only after a few weeks did I feel well enough to leave. I told Ellie I would call someone to pick me up. I'll take you to the train station in the village. Whoever you call will never find this place. It's too remote. I squeezed into Ellie's small car, a testament to the fact that I wasn't fully recovered yet. I thanked her for everything. Her response was simple. Do what you must, Jim, but be careful. I sat and waited for Mike to pick me up. Jesus Christ, Jim. What happened to you? Mike exclaimed when he arrived. On the way back, I told Mike everything. He shook his head in disbelief. I think I know why she did it, Mike. If we divorce, she gets half of everything. Han is greedy and wants it all. I'm sure she promised her friends a lot of money if they got rid of me. She knows the company is worth millions. I think she would have sold it and spent her days sleeping with anyone. You can stay with me, buddy. If anyone asks, I'll say I have no idea where you are. Thanks, Mike. Do me a favor, please. Bring my laptop from the office. Oh, and I need some clothes. Mike laughed and said he felt like he was hiding a fugitive. Not yet, but it might happen if I am caught seeking revenge. Well, then you better not get caught. I don't want to know what you're planning. On the way, we stopped at a shopping mall. I managed to buy some jeans, t-shirts, socks, underwear, and a pair of sneakers. For now, that was enough. I had a full wardrobe at home, or at least I hoped I did. Fortunately, when we arrived at Mike's house, it was dark, and I could only imagine what the neighbors would say about me. According to Mike, Han had been playing the role of a loving wife very well. She called everyone who knew me, everyone except the police. She called Mike regularly every day, asking if he had heard from me. Of course, his answer was always negative. Gradually, I recovered and could walk without severe pain. Mike told me that Han's calls had now reduced to once a week. I guess she was too busy to worry about me. Sometimes having time to think can be beneficial. In my case, it led to pondering how terrible my revenge would be. I wanted real retribution and analyzed my options. Sitting idle all day, I came up with several ways to deal with Han and her friends. The problem was that most of my ideas involved someone else. This was something I wasn't ready for. My hatred led me to what is known as the dark web. After some reading, it became clear that I could hire a hitman if I wanted. There were several references to mechanics, a term on the dark web for hired killers. Eventually I had a plan, but I had no idea how to execute it. Desperate and full of hate, I left a message asking for help with a chemical problem. Of course, I received several messages from some crazies, but there was one that seemed to understand where I was going. I responded to his message. After a few exchanges, I was convinced this guy was the real deal. He seemed satisfied that I wasn't law enforcement. He sent me a program to install that encrypted our messages. After logging out of the account and closing the VPN software, I searched the internet for what he advised me to buy, as I needed specific brands. It took a bit longer than expected. When I had everything I needed, I realized that for this, I needed to know when Han and her lovers would be home. Back online, I bought a few listening devices. Bugs. Most evenings, Mike and I sat and talked. He never asked what I was planning, and I never told him. Business was going well, and the company had secured a few new clients. I assured Mike that I would probably return to the office in a week or two. When the bugs arrived, I returned home. Han's car was in the driveway. Maybe she had a quiet night last night. I didn't know and didn't care. I saw Han leave the house and went inside 5 minutes later. Thank God it hadn't occurred to her to change the locks. She must have been confident I was dead, so no need to worry. I placed a bug in the living room and another in the bedroom. Despite the presence of men in the house, it was clean and tidy. Fresh linen was on the bed, with no signs of anyone else. That evening, I heard Han talking to a man. I recognized the voice of one of the men from the van. He was there, sleeping with Han, and informed her that he had arranged with the others for Friday night. "Oh God, I love you. How many will be here?" Han asked. I managed to convince 9 guys. It would have been 10, but one can't make it this week. 9 will be enough. I closed my laptop. I didn't need to listen to them fooling around. I hoped he enjoyed it because if my plan worked after Friday, no one would be with Han anymore. On Friday night, I sat in the bushes opposite our house, waiting for the action to start. Finally, Han returned home, accompanied by several other cars following her. I gave them 30 minutes, thinking it was enough time to get started. Then slowly made my way to the back door. I heard noise upstairs. Han was screaming, and everyone else was cheering her on. I quietly climbed the stairs, stopping to ensure they were all in the bedroom. I poured the first liquid on the carpet, leaving a trail to the kitchen. Then I repeated the process with the second liquid. The man who explained this to me was right about one thing. When they mixed, the smell was barely noticeable. He warned me that the more I used, the stronger the final result would be. Back in the kitchen, I faced the tricky part. If I messed this up, we all would go to hell. The third liquid was essentially the trigger. Once mixed with the other liquids and the chemistry reacted, everything would go haywire. I poured the liquid into a puddle near the other 2. I guessed it would take a few minutes for them to meet. Slowly and quietly, I exited the door, closing it softly behind me. I ran down the path to where I had parked the rental car. As I drove away, I saw a bright flash in the rearview mirror. I didn't stop. I just kept driving until I reached Mike's house. Luckily, Mike had a date, and when I arrived, he wasn't home. I took a shower and went to bed. The next morning, I drove to the house. I acted like I wanted to let Han know I was alive despite her friend's efforts. The other part of the act was to collect my clothes and some personal items, although I knew they were all burned. When I turned down the street, a police officer stopped me. "Sorry, sir. You can't go any further." "But I live here, just down the road at Willow Cottage. Please park your car and wait here." The officer walked to the cottage. A few minutes later, he returned with a man in a suit. "Mr. Robertson, I'm Inspector Davis. May I ask where you were last night?" "I was home. Well, actually, I've been staying at a friend's. My wife and I are separating." "How long have you been staying at this friend's place?" "A few months. I just came to collect my remaining clothes and personal items." "Unfortunately, there was a fire at the cottage last night. May I take a look?" "It is my house, or at least it was." We walked the path together, the detective asking me a few more questions. Did I keep any flammable materials in the house? No, not at all. There was a small can of gasoline in the shed that I used to fuel the lawnmower. The cottage was completely destroyed. One wall had collapsed, and the roof sagged at an odd angle. As you can see, sir, the fire destroyed the building. No one is allowed inside except firefighters and rescue teams. They are currently recovering the bodies. Did your wife have guests last night? I have no idea. As I said, we're separating, and I don't know what she was doing last night. You said they are recovering the bodies. How many so far? 10. They believe that's all, but they're still checking. I stood there, looking shocked, as anyone in my position would. I thanked the detective and returned to my car. A few miles down the road, I called Mike. I explained the situation, and Mike assured me that he would confirm we were home all night. Naturally, I was questioned about the fire. I told the police that Han and I were separating and that I was staying at Mike's until things were sorted out. The investigation into the fire concluded after 2 months, and it was deemed an accident, likely caused by a faulty gas appliance. The coroner recorded accidental deaths for those who perished in the fire, 1 woman and 9 men. In my statement, I suggested that Han probably had a party with some work colleagues since we were separating, and I had no better explanation. I attended Han's funeral more for appearances than anything else. As the coffin was lowered into the ground, I threw a handful of soil in a single rose. Attached to the stem of the rose was a card. I had written on it, "Burn in hell, ___." Most of those present probably thought it was a personal gesture of love. Yeah, right, as if it could be that. Han's mother asked me why I wasn't home that night and what Han was doing in the house with 9 men. We were separating, waiting for the divorce. And as for why she had 9 men in the house, figure that out yourself. I turned and walked away. I moved from Mike's house to a small furnished apartment. The only significant loss was having to replace my entire wardrobe. Eventually, the insurance company paid out for the house, and I sold the plot to a developer, having no desire to build anew. The media speculated on why there were 9 men and 1 woman in the house that night. I made no comment and let people draw their conclusions. As for the 9 men, I knew none of them and paid no attention to the newspaper reports of their funerals. I tried to go back to thank Ellie for saving me. Unfortunately, I couldn't find the cottage, despite asking some locals where it was. Mike never asked me about the fire. He offered to set me up on a date if I was interested. Right now, I just want to get on with my life, especially since a woman lives in the same apartment complex as me. We haven't had a proper conversation yet, just exchanged greetings. If we start dating and things get serious, there will be a prenuptial agreement before I get married again. I had a lot of time to reflect on everything that had happened. Sometimes late at night, the events replayed in my mind, making it hard to sleep. Therapy helped, but the memories were still there, lurking in the shadows. Moving forward wasn't easy, but it was necessary. Mike, always the supportive friend, continued to encourage me. He suggested various hobbies and activities to keep my mind occupied. I started running, which unexpectedly helped clear my head. The physical exertion was a welcome distraction from the chaos of my thoughts. The woman in my apartment building, her name was Sarah, began to show more interest in me. We started with casual conversations in the hallway, which eventually led to coffee dates. She was kind and understanding, a stark contrast to the chaos I had experienced with Han. I found myself looking forward to our time together. Despite my growing feelings for Sarah, I remained cautious. The scars from my previous relationship were still fresh. I discussed my concerns with Mike, who reassured me that it was okay to take things slowly. Sarah seemed to understand my hesitations and never pushed me for more than I was willing to give. One evening, while walking in the park with Sarah, I decided to share part of my past with her. She listened attentively, never interrupting, just offering silent support. When I finished, she took my hand and simply said, "Thank you for trusting me." Her response made me realize that not everyone was like Han, and maybe, just maybe, I could find happiness again. As our relationship deepened, the idea of marriage came up again. This time, I was adamant about a prenuptial agreement. Sarah respected my decision, and we discussed it openly. It was clear that we both valued honesty and transparency, which only strengthened our bond. Life slowly began to take on a new normalcy. The nightmares became less frequent, and I started to find joy in the little things again. Sarah and I continued to build a life together, step by step. Mike remained a constant in my life, always ready with advice or a joke to lift my spirits. Looking back, it's hard to believe how much had changed. From the depths of betrayal and anger, I managed to find a glimmer of hope. Ellie's act of kindness, Mike's unwavering support, and Sarah's gentle patience all played a part in my healing process. In the end, I realized that while the past would always be a part of me, it didn't have to define my future. With the right people by my side, I could move forward and create a new chapter in my life, filled with love, trust, and genuine happiness.